Don the Sin Skin and get their execution force ready to go. Today we're talking Assassins in 9th edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today I thought it would be fun to go through the Imperial Assassins and talk a little bit about their rules and how they fit in 9th edition and talk through the positives and negatives of fielding each. Let's jump straight in then and talk about these black-clad killers in 9th edition. So if you want to field an assassin in 9th edition, then there's two different ways that you can do so. Firstly, you can make use of the Agents of the Imperium rule, and that allows you to field one assassin completely slotless within another Imperial detachment, and when you do so, it doesn't break any detachment or whole army-wide rules. That one's really quite a handy one, to be honest, as now almost every Imperial army has rules that get broken if you include other models. While that was the case, assassins were something that you'd almost never want to include, as in general you just can't justify giving up a massive army-wide special rule just for one 100-point character, even if it's a good one. As it stands though, assassins really are quite easy to include in Imperial forces, and it's really going to hold back an army to include one of them in your detachments. The other option, if you want to spam assassins and take a lot of them though, are to take an execution force. That's basically a special form of vanguard detachment. You include it without an HQ slot, and then you can take up to one of each of the assassins, so you still can't spam them and take something like 3 Eversors or something, for example. In general, I describe that as the more fun and fluffy way to play. Usually I feel that taking an entire execution force is kind of overkill for what these guys do, and you're probably going to be drawing too many bodies and damage away from the main battle line by doing that. Plus it'll cost a few command points to buy that vanguard detachment in the first place, and that might stop you from taking a detachment of something else if you'd wanted. Still though, getting to play with every single one of the assassins in the same game is really good fun, and it can give you a very different way to play a game with the same army, if you do want to shake up the format a bit. In any case, currently in 9th edition, each assassin costs you 100 points per model. They all have quite radically different abilities depending on their specialism, but they're all infantry characters, and share a few defining features such as a 4+ invul, access to deep strike if they want to. They can't have a warlord trait, and most of them share this profile, though a couple of them do get a few extra small buffs on it. They move quite fast at 7 inches, have weapon skill and ballistic skill 2+, strength and toughness 4, 5 wounds and 5 attacks, and only a 6+ save, so you're usually going to be saving on that invul. The deep strike's pretty handy, as that means that you can have a very easy pop-up threat, and guarantees that your assassin will usually be able to do something before they're destroyed if you need to. Only having the 4+ invul though does mean that most of them are relatively easy to gun down. Finally, while each flavour of assassin has a couple of stratagems all of their own, they do share a couple of generic ones. The first one for 2 CP is an army construction one called Shadow Assignment. This one's the ability to swap out your assassin for a different one after you've seen your opponent's army list, so it essentially allows a little bit of legal list tailoring, though of course you are paying a command point price for the privilege. I'd say perhaps the most obvious use of that would be to, say, get a Culexus assassin in if you just happen to be fighting a force with loads of psychers. The Culexus in particular is just one that's going to be far better when there are psychers around, and a bit worse when there aren't any. I guess you could also swap out to an Eversor if you were fighting loads of hordes maybe, or perhaps a Callidus if there's going to be a whole load of command points used. It is quite a nice ability, but at 2 command points I think it's a bit take or leave. That is going to diminish your other options. The other one is a free ability, 0 CP, called Priority Threat Neutralized. This one's quite a fluffy reward for allowing the assassins to do what they want to do and kill characters. If you kill a character in a phase, then you can get 1 command point, or 2 CP if it was the warlord. I quite like the way that this genuinely incentivises assassins to go after characters, as it gives your whole army a bit of a reward. Let's bear in mind though that you can still only use a stratagem once per phase, so you're not going to be able to do this for say 2 Vindicares shooting 2 characters dead in the shooting phase. You'd only be able to make use of it for one of those. Talking of which, let's go through the assassins one by one now, and talk about some of their relative strengths and weaknesses. First up we have the long-range sniper that's the Vindicare assassin. He's got the standard stat line that we talked about earlier, and is armed with an Exodus rifle, Exodus pistol, and blind grenades. The Exodus rifle is pretty much unquestionably the best single-shot sniper weapon in all of 40k. Heavy one shot at 72-inch range, strength 5, AP-3 and damage 3, but it augments that with all sorts of special rules, some of it on the weapon's profile, and some of it from the assassin himself. It ignores invul saves, wounds infantry units on a 2+. Unmodified wound rolls are a 6, change the damage characteristic to a big D6, though that's a bit unreliable I think. Attacks made by it always hit on a 2+ regardless of modifiers, provided the assassin didn't move. It ignores cover, And then there's the final fun headshot special rule, which when you manage to wound the model gives you the chance for some more mortal wounds. You roll a dice and on a 3+ they take 1 more, then a 4+ they take 1 more after that, and then you keep on going until you finally fail a roll or the model is destroyed. Overall, it's really quite a massive barrage of special rules there. In general, it does have a pretty reasonable chance of one-shotting a 4-wound character in a single round of sniper fire, maybe about 1 in every 2 shots. I believe if you average out the damage, then you'll get an average of 2 or 3 wounds on infantry characters, though obviously that can swing really high or really low, depending on what you roll. You'd be surprised how often a 1 comes up to hit and wound when you're hitting and wounding on 2+. Otherwise, he has an Exeter's pistol, which he can fire in close combat. The only downside to that is it's a strength of 4, but it means that he can fire it on the move as well. He's got blind grenades, which he could fire instead of firing one of his rifles. I don't think that they'd usually be wanted to be used all that much, but they can inflict a -1 to hit on the enemy unit, if that's going to be better than that massive sniper rifle shot. And finally, he has a stealth suit to try and help keep him safe. Enemies subtract 1 from the hit rolls against him, and if he's on a terrain feature, they subtract 2 from the hit rolls instead. Unfortunately, with the way that 9th edition modifiers work, that rule has got worse. You'd only be a -1 to hit, but I guess it does help counteract any positive modifiers the enemy might have. Finally, he has a couple of stratagems, 1 command point for double kill, 1 CP to shoot that sniper rifle again, with the stipulation that you can't fire at the same model. I think usually if you do have another character that is going to be effective against, that's a really good investment for a command point. You always have the possibility for the sniper rifle to swing really high, and provided command points aren't in a really short supply, that could be a very good one to use. The other one I'm a bit less sold on, the turbo penetrator round. This one's used to give him a little bit of damage against vehicles and monsters. If he hits the target, then they get D3 mortal wounds and the attack sequence ends. I'd say that this one could be quite a nice one to reliably finish off a vehicle or monster, but I wouldn't go using it every turn for actual just genuine damage output. You're giving up a really powerful sniper rifle shot with that, and between giving up his standard shooting and also spending 1 command point, that's really not worth it for a 2+ chance to deal D3 mortal wounds. Probably best if a really high save enemy vehicle has just 1 or 2 wounds left and it really needs to die and there's nothing else that can do it. Overall though, despite having really quite decent sniper rifle rules, the Vindicare assassin just isn't all that impressive right now. The main problem in 9th edition is that terrain has become so much more abundant, it's a lot easier to hide things than they were before, and also more and more armies are getting a version of the bodyguard special rule, which means that you can't target characters with ranged attacks whatsoever. So the presence of things like Celestian Sacrosancts, Space Marine Company veterans, or any of the other bodyguard units could really make this guy unhappy. Unless he can draw a bead on something really valuable, it's just generally not going to be very worth it shooting against standard infantry with 1 powerful shot. Still though, if you are expecting to see loads of small enemy support characters, the Vindicare really could come into his own, and I guess he could at least really limit the movement of where those characters could go. Moving on, we come to the drug-fueled blender that is the Eversor assassin. Always a bit funny that this guy's considered an assassin, to be honest, seeing as he's more of a weapon of war that just cuts his way straight through to the enemy and leaves everyone between him and his target dead. He's got a small profile bump from the Vindicare, he's got 6 wounds and 6 attacks, so has a little bit more might, and he also gets an extra 2 attacks on the charge as well, meaning that this guy's usually going to be 8 attacks when he strikes. He's armed with an Executioner pistol, Neuro Gauntlet, Power Sword and Melter Bombs. Generally this guy's going to be your anti-infantry blender model. The Executioner pistol can chip in a fair bit. It's a 4-shot pistol with strength 4 AP -1, and it rerolls wound rolls against infantry. Should reliably kill 2 or 3 of them dead, I think. It's got a Melter Bomb if you can get within 4 inches for a strength 8 grenade with D6 damage, and you get to reroll the wound roll against vehicles too. Very nice when he can throw it, but I think a lot of the time this guy might be jumping out of deep strike and he might be out of range. Finally, when he gets to combat, he can make those 8 attacks either with the Neuro Gauntlet or the Power Sword. The Gauntlet is strength 5 AP -1 and rerolls all wound rolls. The Power Sword is strength 5 AP -3, but you don't get that rule. Typically, I think the Neuro Gauntlet is generally going to be superior. I think it only becomes worse when the enemy has a 2+ save from something, in which case you're better off with the AP. The Stimcrazed Maniac has plenty of extra special rules as well. He's got a fun explosion special rule, where on a 4+, enemy units within 6 inches take D3 mortal wounds. Could be pretty nice if he dies in the middle of an enemy formation. That's going to cause a fair bit of collateral damage without harming your guys at all. His Sentinel Array allows him to get a free bit of shooting if the enemy falls back. Friends On is the special rule that gives him an extra 2 attacks on the charge, but more importantly it gives him a big 3d6 inch charge rather than the standard 2d6. That really is a super nice rule when paired with his Deep Strike. It means that he's one of the few units that can get a 3d6 inch charge out of Deep Strike now in 40k. and with the help of a command point, it's going to really reliably engage the enemy from a pop-up charge. Finally, he has one last special rule called Killing Rampage, which is his chewing through hordes ability. Every time you slay a model with this unit, it allows him to make one extra attack with the same weapon against that unit, though those attacks can't generate extra attacks. In addition, it also allows him to consolidate 6 inches rather than up to 3. The Killing Rampage one does seem a bit all or nothing. It's going to be super good against hordes that he's chewing through no problem, but if you're fighting something like Space Marines for example, it's not going to be all that important. You might only get an extra couple of attacks with that. I do feel that perhaps the Eversor is a little bit hyper specialised in killing 1 wound infantry. When 8th edition first came out and most things only had 1 wound, then he wasn't really too bad. But now everything from characters to standard Space Marines have increased in wounds. All that damage 1 just doesn't really make quite as much of an impact. He does have a couple of useful stratagems though. 1 command point for a pop-up 4+ feel no pain is no joke. For 1 phase that will literally make him twice as durable, and if that's going to make the difference between him say fighting in the fight phase or getting off 1 last charge, then that's going to be pretty nice. And then when he does get into combat, he's got a 2 command point stim overload stratagem to allow him to fight again, though he does take a mortal wound on the roll of 1 to 3 on a d6. Fighting again is always nice to have as an option. You can just assess each time he has the opportunity to do it. If it's going to make the difference between clearing a unit, then it could well be worth it for 2 command points. In general, despite having fairly specialised damage output, I still do really like the Eversor. Near guaranteed charge out of Deep Strike is a really handy thing to have, and he's a pretty scary threat to have hanging over the enemy's head. If he gets into his target of choice, then he's going to be a real monster. And I must admit, I do really like any explodes on death style special rules, particularly the Eversor's one, which has a 4+ chance for each individual unit, not just a 4+ for everyone. I think he's a really fun assassin to use, but I do think he might struggle against quite a few armies in the game right now, anything with a high wound count. Moving on, we come to the psychic horror that is the Culexus assassin. Again, they've got a fairly standard assassin profile. The Culexus actually has 1 fewer attacks than most of the rest, only having attacks 4, not attacks 5. The Culexus is armed with the Animus Speculum and Psych Out grenades, though in combat it's certainly helped out by its life drain special rule, meaning that you can't make any standard armor saves against its close combat attacks. That's not going to make it good in close combat unfortunately, with only damage 1, but again, like the Eversor, it should be able to punch a few 1 wound infantry to death. Otherwise, the Animus Speculum is an 18-inch range assault D3 weapon, strength 5, AP -4 and damage 1. Again, fairly tame and not going to do all that much unless there's Psychers nearby. If there is a Psyker within 18 inches, it powers up a bit and gets to assault D6 rather than D3. And you do have a 1 command point option called Pariah's Gaze to make it damage D3 if you'd like to. Maybe good enough to be worth it if you're firing at multi-wound infantry, or if you manage to get line of sight to an enemy Psyker without an invul save. You do have a fairly reasonable chance of one-shotting something like a Space Marine Librarian if you roll really well. It can fire Psych Out grenades at the same time as it fires its Animus Speculum. They're grenade D3 weapons at 6-inch range, strength 2, AP 0, damage 1. And the main advantage of them is that if you roll a 6 to hit with it, the enemy suffers 1 mortal wound if it's a Psyker or Demon unit and the attack sequence ends. I wouldn't really count on them doing anything much. I guess they're nice to have if you're really close to the enemy anyway. Really, I think that the main reasons to take the Culexus are its 2 special rules, Abomination and Ethereum. Abomination perhaps being the main one, which is if you have any Psykers within 18 inches of the model, they're -2 to cast and -2 to deny, and also the Culexus can't be affected by any psychic powers of any type. The -2 to cast and deny really is quite nice whenever you're fighting any Psyker heavy armies. Things like Chaos Demons, Thousand Suns or Grey Knights come to mind. Having one of these up front can be really nice for messing with their psychic phase, things that they need to do to win the game, as well as being a potential screen for Smite all by himself. If he happens to be the closest visible target, then the Smites will have to target him and they will have no effect at all. Basically, if you're playing one of these psychic heavy armies and you see a Culexus on the board, then that's pretty much guaranteed to be a model that's going to cause a headache in some form. I'd bear in mind though that this also affects your own Psykers, so it means that you're very rarely going to want to run a Culexus assassin alongside Grey Knights or something, as it's also going to make their psychic phase rubbish too if they're in range. Overall though, that's a really powerful special rule. It's going to make Psykers either have to back off or face that penalty, neither of which are particularly ideal for them. The other really good one is that Ethereum special rule. I believe the background to that is that the Culexus Temple invested in that really early, and now their mad stonks gains and smart contracts means that they can't be touched at all, so that when anyone attacks the Culexus assassin, it counts as having a weapon skill and ballistic skill of 6+. With immunity to psychic as well, it means that the Culexus assassin is by far the most durable of any of the assassins. You can afford to have him out in the open, and he might well soak up an entire squad's worth of shooting. It also really dissuades the enemy from pouring any of their really heavy firepower into them, as they might just get absolutely no hits whatsoever, and even then those hits might well get tanked on his 4+ invul, even if you get to actually hit and wound him. Overall, it just means that the Culexus assassin is a really annoying thorn in your opponent's side. Pretty irritating if they have psychers, though maybe a bit more of a distraction Carnifex if they don't. His weapons just really aren't all that powerful enough to make a big difference in terms of killing things, but to have one a durable model that they're really going to struggle to remove is no bad thing. Other than that Pariah's Gaze one to boost the Animus Speculum, his other stratagem is Soul Horror, 2 command points for a pop-up aura of Fight Last, so enemy units can't interrupt in the fight phase when they're within 3 inches of him. This gives him another really quite decent use in my opinion. It's a pricey but powerful way of getting your other assault units to actually do the damage that they're supposed to, and means that you could use him alongside another couple of your own melee units to try and take down one very scary enemy threat, which usually you might be scared of the opponent interrupting on if you did a mass charge on them. It is quite nice, though at 2 command points it is a touch on the pricey side I think. Overall though, I found the Culexus a really interesting one, definitely an option to provide a bit of anti-psyker in an army list that doesn't have much. Finally, last but not least, we have the Callidus assassin. The Master of Disguise, she's the one that uses polymorphine to blend in with the enemy. She's got the standard assassin profile, 5 wounds and 5 attacks, and she's armed with a Neural Shredder, Phase Sword and Poison Blades. Her polymorphine is probably worth mentioning first, as it kind of defines her role. If you choose to set her up off the board, then it means that she gets to set up d6 plus 3 inches from enemy units. So as it says here, if you roll a 4 for that d6, then she can set up over 7 inches away from them. This one's a pretty powerful ability to be honest. It means that she might be able to deep strike in places where she normally can't, and the opponent can't be guaranteed that just screening out 9 inches from every board edge is a way to stop her from getting her where she needs to be. When she arrives, she's really quite a good single character assassin in my opinion. I'd argue perhaps the best one for actually killing characters in melee out of any of them. First up, she strikes with a Neural Shredder, a 9-inch range weapon with Assault 1, and you roll 3d6 versus the enemy's leadership characteristic. If it's greater than equal to it, then they take d3 mortal wounds. 3d6 should usually be enough, unless you're fighting something really high leadership, like Necrons or Custodes for example, in which case it's going to be a bit more unreliable. Then when she gets into combat, I think she's usually going to be wanting to strike with her Phase Sword. That one's Strength User, AP-3 and Damage 2. Pretty important as that ignores invul saves. So it really is a pretty choice profile for taking down something like a Space Marine Captain with a 4+ Iron Halo save. Between her Neural Shredder and melee attacks, she really has a good chance of killing one character like that. I believe between the Shredder and the Phased Sword, that's usually going to be around about 4 to 6 wounds on a standard Space Marine model with a 4+ invul save or something. So she's got a really good chance of killing most standard sized characters in one shot. She also has some Poison Blades as well. They're only Strength 2, AP-1 and Damage 1. But she gets to make 1 extra attack with that against whatever target she strikes with, so usually worth making 1. And I guess it could still be the weapon of choice against certain things, maybe toughness 8 monsters perhaps, not that she really wants to be engaging those in the first place. Otherwise she's got a couple of other special rules. Hit and run to allow the army to shoot and charge when she fell back. Could be quite good to jump in, engage a weak enemy unit on the sidelines, and even if she doesn't kill them all, then she can still jump straight out and carry on her rampage. And then perhaps most interestingly for her, the Reign of Confusion special rule, which gives your opponent an annoying command point tax in the first battle round. Every time they use the stratagem, on a 4+, they have to spend an additional command points, otherwise the stratagem fails to go off. That's really going to depend on just how many stratagems the opponent wants to use on battle round 1, and it might even dissuade them from using certain stratagems, giving your whole army a bit of an advantage in limiting their options. It could be really brutal against armies that have really planned out a use for every single command point, and if they wind up not being able to use some of them, then compromises are going to need to be made. Hopefully that could be good for a wasted command point or 2 on the enemy on average, and if you think it makes a lot of sense to continue doing that, you could use 2 command points for Supreme Deception, another round of that Reign of Confusion, so maybe it could affect the enemy army in the first 2 battle rounds. I would bear in mind though, for the enemy to be spending more command points than you on this, on average they'd have to use 4 different stratagems within that round. Certainly not impossible, but against some armies you might be losing out more than the opponent on average. Finally, her other stratagem is called Acrobatic. This allows her to advance and charge, and also makes her -1 to hit as well, so a bit of a durability boost and also a threat range boost. If this makes the difference between getting a reliable charge on a key enemy character, it could well be worth it. Being able to put that Phased Sword to good use would be very, very nice. Overall, I think the Callidus is one of the stronger picks, one of the best assassins at just jumping in and killing one given character. Polymorphine means that she's a bit more likely to be able to actually make it to her target, and that Reign of Confusion is just added value. You're likely to waste at least some of your opponent's options this way, and I think that that's got a value all of its own. So overall in 40k, are assassins worth it right now? In general, I do feel that they're a little bit niche at the moment. For 100 points, they're certainly not an auto-include within Imperial armies, though they do occasionally make it into top tournament lists still, even at this point. Currently out of the assassins, I think my favourite two are currently the Culexus and the Callidus. I must admit though, the Culexus is kind of niche. It really provides some great anti-psyker for armies that don't have enough of it. I guess currently with Grey Knights and Thousand Suns being relatively common in the meta, the Culexus is going to be about as strong as it ever is. Being annoying to shift does mean that it is going to cause the opponent a bit of a headache, and pop-up fight last when you need it could be helpful against the right army too. I'd say the Callidus might be the best general purpose one though. Reign of Confusion is almost always going to restrict the opponent's options a tiny bit. She's hard to screen, and being able to charge things that you wouldn't normally be able to charge is great, and if she does manage to make it into a support character, there's a really good chance that she's going to be able to kill them in one round of fighting, which is pretty much exactly what you want for an Imperial assassin. I think perhaps my top choice for including an assassin in an Imperial list would generally be to stick with the Callidus assassin, and then maybe spend the 2 command points to switch out for a Culexus if it's really going to matter in a psyker heavy matchup. Otherwise, I'd say my next favourite is the Eversor. As I said, I absolutely love his rules with a reliable charge out of Deep Strike, and he will absolutely blend hordes if you can manage to get him into any of them. In general though, I'm just not sure he's quite destructive enough for his points cost, despite his really fun special rules that I like a lot. If you're playing a very heavy infantry list, for example, something like Dark Angel's Death Wing, or Thousand Suns with a bunch of Terminators, I just can't help but think he's just going to get into an enemy unit and then maybe kill 1 or 2 models at best, before getting splattered in return. Finally, I'd say perhaps the least strong assassin at the moment is unfortunately the Vindicare, and that's more of a problem with 9th edition and sniper weapons more than anything else. Far more line of sight blocking terrain means that he's not likely to get line of sight to valuable characters that the enemy wants hidden. Characters in general just tend to be a fair bit tougher with more wounds on their profile, and if the enemy happens to have any bodyguard style units in there, then that's further bad news, and they can even have their characters right out in the open in front of your Vindicare assassin, and he won't be able to shoot them. He's also unfortunately not quite as safe in 9th edition as in 8th. You can't just put him on a high ruin and know that he's not going to be shot. He's still going to be able to be directly targetable unless you have your own forces nearby. Still though, if you're going into a matchup where you know he's going to have some reliable targets out in the open, he's really not too bad at all. He's certainly one of the better snipers out there in 40k in terms of damage for the points, but I think in most competitive games he's going to struggle to get that. So let me know what you think of the assassins in 9th, particularly if you've had much experience playing with or against them. Which one is your favourite assassin and why? If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I will certainly keep these regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention one way in which you can help keep them coming, and that's the Auspex Tactics Patreon page down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits every month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.